Okay, we will call the meeting back to order again. Sergeant at Arms, please invite the next witness to the witness table, Ms. Raeesah Khan. Through Ms. Khan, please take a seat. Thank you. For the record, please state, you can take off your mask when you speak.
Okay.
Please state your name, occupation, and the positions you hold.
My name's Raeesah Han, and I don't hold any positions currently.
Okay, the evidence that you'll be giving today before the committee will be taken on oath. So if you so desire, you can also take an affirmation. So clerk, please administer the oath or affirmation.
I, Raeesah Han, do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence which I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Please be seated. The Committee of Privileges is looking into the complaint made by the Leader of the House, Ms. Indrani Raja, against former member of Sengkang GRC, Ms. Raeesah Khan, for breach of privilege. So thank you once again for attending today's hearing to give evidence before the committee and to answer the questions which the members here would like to put to you. You have taken a solemn obligation to answer our questions truthfully, and you are under affirmation. And if you refuse to answer our questions directly or attempt to mislead the committee, such behavior will be an offense and in contempt of this committee, which I'm sure you're aware. I would like now to call on Minister Edwin Tong to raise his questions.
Good afternoon, Ms. Han.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for coming to assist in the fact-finding for the COP. As Mr. Speaker and Chairman of the COP has mentioned, leaders put in a complaint. I think you're aware of that. Basically, there are two heads to it. One relates to an untruthful statement or statements, and the other relates to a failure to substantiate the basis on which those statements were made. This COP has a task of understanding the circumstances, making some findings, and eventually also recommendations, where appropriate, of sanctions. So it is important that we understand the matter fully and also understand the relative role and position that you played in the context of how these statements came to be made on the various occasions. Do you understand that?
Yes, I understand.
Yes, so I will be asking you some questions. Please answer them directly, and where appropriate, please elaborate, and I'll invite you to do so where they are relevant. And if you think there are other people who might also be able to assist this COP in the fact-finding process, please do raise those with us as well. Okay? In the course of this session, I will also be asking you if there are any documents, emails, messages, other hard copies, and so on, which may exist in relation to or arising from the contents of the evidence. And I may from time to time ask you to produce them. So I'd be grateful if you could make a small note, if you have a notebook or a piece of paper there, and just keep a record of it.
Okay.
Okay? Ms. Khan, a short while ago, there was a press conference by the Workers' Party in relation to the decision that the disciplinary panel, the DP, had taken. Are you aware of that press conference? Have you seen it?
I've seen it briefly because I had to make a call to my parents, but I didn't watch it or I didn't read any of the news articles.
All right.
Yeah.
I've got some articles and I have also just seen them myself.
Okay.
I'm just going to put to you some facts that were stated at the press conference, and I'm going to ask you for your position on them.
Okay.
I will read them to you because I don't have copies, given I just got them off the press conference earlier today, in fact, a short while ago. There was a statement issued by the Workers' Party CEC And it says this. On 2nd November, the Workers' Party CEC agreed to form a DP, disciplinary panel, to look into admissions made by Raeesah Khan in Parliament by way of personal statement on 1st November 2021. It goes on to talk about the disciplinary panel and how you subsequently resigned as a member of Parliament on the 30th of November. And it goes on to say, and I quote, as the CEC had not received her resignation in writing by then meaning by 30th November, it proceeded to deliberate the recommendations of the disciplinary panel. The CEC voted overwhelmingly that she would have been expected to resign on her own accord, failing which she would be expelled from the party. So this is the position taken in relation to where we are now today. Now, in relation to the statements in question, and I'll just quickly give you a brief summary, and if at any point in time you can't remember the statements you've made in Parliament,
Yes.
this is not a memory test, so feel free to stop and I will show you copies of the transcripts. But on the basis that you do remember, I thought we can go faster.
Okay, thank you.
So on the 3rd of August, there was a speech that you made in the context of empowering women. And in there, you, besides talking about your views on how women can be advanced, you recounted a personal anecdote. The anecdote concerns accompanying a 25-year-old survivor to a police station. Subsequently, you have admitted that that anecdote was false and it never happened, correct?
Correct.
Now, in October, there was a further parliamentary sitting, and this is about 2 months after the speech was made. And in October, you had been asked various questions by Minister Shanmugam in relation to details such as the police station, which date, what location, and some specifics of the occasion. And he also asked you to confirm that whatever you had said had happened, in fact happened, and you did confirm that. And you subsequently also agreed with Ms. Indrani Raja, the Leader of the House, that those statements were also false, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, I'd like you to just pause for a moment in October, and in that context, ask you to comment on what was said at the press release, a press conference earlier. There's a press article titled from CNA titled WP Leadership Knew About Raeesah Khan's Untruth a week after her original speech in August, and that's ascribed to Mr. Pritam Singh. It goes on to say, and I quote from the article, Ms. Khan also repeated the untruth in Parliament in October, despite being asked to clarify the matter then, said Mr. Singh. Now, pausing there for a moment, can you remember the occasion at which you were asked to clarify the statement before the October sitting?
Before the October sitting, I had a conversation with Leader of the Opposition, Pritam Singh, and the conversation was that if I were to retain the narrative, or if I were to continue the narrative, there would be no judgment.
Can you tell us which date this took place?
3rd of October.
Where did this take place?
In my house.
Was there anyone else present besides the two of you?
No, there was not.
Are there any email or messages exchanged as a result of this?
No, there was not.
The discussion for you to retain the narrative and there will be no judgment. Can you give me your interpretation of that? What do you make of that statement?
My interpretation was that that there would be no consequences for me to continue the narrative that I had begun on the in August. After
In other
the
words,
speech.
there will be no consequences on you if you continue the lie and keep up the contention that there was this occasion, this anecdote that you had
Yes.
described on the 3rd of August, despite it being a lie.
That was my interpretation.
Yes.
Yes.
And there was therefore no attempt by Mr. Singh to ask you to clarify the matter in favor of putting out the truth?
Not at that point in time, no.
Not on the 3rd of October,
No.
right? This news article goes further. There was, I think, a press statement made by Mr. Singh. And there followed, I think, some press questions. And I'd just like to draw your attention to a part of the report which is titled Taking Responsibility. Let me just read it to you verbatim. And I quote, "When asked why the claim was allowed to remain uncorrected," and the claim here refers to the anecdote, Mr. Singh said, and I quote, "Each Workers' Party MP is a leader in his or her own right. And if you have done something wrong, it is your responsibility to set the record right. Adequately set the record right, yes, full stop. In response to questions over why Ms. Khan did not follow orders to clarify the matter in October, Mr. Singh added, and I quote, these are his words, why she didn't take heed of that instruction? Why did she ignore it? That's not a question I can answer." Can I invite you to comment on this in light of what you have just said earlier about the discussion you had on the 3rd of October?
I think regardless of the discussion that I had, I agree that it was my responsibility to come forth with the truth. And I take full responsibility of that. I think despite advice, I should have taken the step to rectify my mistake then.
This contention that there was an order for you to clarify the matter in October, can you give us your view on this?
I mean, I'm hearing this for the first time, so I...
Would you agree with the characterization that there was an order for you to clarify the matter in Parliament in October?
I do not agree with that characterization.
In fact, had there been such an order, we would have expected to see Mr. Singh stand up on the 4th of October or shortly thereafter and confront you, either directly or through messages, with a question as to why you didn't follow the order, correct?
I cannot assume what he would have done, but that was not what
That
was
didn't
done.
happen.
Yes.
At any point in time, shortly after the 4th of October, did Mr. Singh come to you and say, why didn't you follow the order that we agreed on? Did he say that to you?
No.
Earlier on, your secretarial assistant, Ms. Loh Pei, came to give evidence. And she explained to us that sometime after the 4th of October, there was a meeting which took place at Mr. Singh's house, at which she and Mr. Nathan, Yudhishthira Nathan, attended. You would be familiar with this meeting, right?
Yes, I was aware of the meeting.
And the meeting was triggered by an initial conversation between you and Ms. Loh, either on or shortly before the 12th of October, correct?
Correct.
Can you give us, in gist, what happened at that conversation between you and Ms. Loh?
I can't recall exactly, but I think the conversations were around a statement that I would be making in Parliament, what that statement might sound like, and the options that I had.
By that time, had it been settled that you would, at the next parliamentary sitting, come clean and admit that the statement was false?
No, it had not yet.
So by the 12th of October, it had not yet crystallized that you will be making a statement in Parliament that will admit to the falsity of the earlier statement, correct?
Sorry, I think I have to rectify that. I think, yes, by the time of the 12th of October, it was decided that I would make a statement in Parliament.
You had decided.
Yes.
You had decided. So actually, you had decided, and that's why that triggered a chain of events in relation to what Ms. Loh then told us. She said she went with Mr. Nathan to see Mr. Singh to manage the process.
Yes.
What you would say, what impact it will have on your constituents, managing your social media. Those were some of what Ms. Loh told us.
Yes.
Would that be correct?
that would be correct. She was very concerned over my well-being, so hence that's why she went to Pritam Singh's house.
That is exactly what she told us. She was principally concerned with your well-being. Now, just pausing for a moment from October, Ms. Loh also told us that a few days after the 3rd of August, you had informed Mr. Singh, Ms. Lim, and Mr. Faisal Manap that the statements made on the 3rd of August were false.
Correct.
Can you describe that with some detail in relation to setting out the time frame, who was present, where these discussions took place, what was discussed, and whether there are any documentary evidence or papers which corroborate or substantiate these discussions? So take your time if you need to just compose yourself for a minute.
Thank you. So the first conversation I had with any party leadership that, the first time that I gave any sense that it was an untruth was on the 7th of August. And it was a short phone call, which then was followed by a meeting at Pritam Singh's house with the chair, Sylvia Lim, and vice chair, Faisal Manap.
So 7th of August, there was a short phone call only with Pritam Singh.
Yes.
When was this meeting?
It was a few days after. I'm sorry, but I really can't think of the date. But it was, I think it was the following Wednesday or Thursday.
So that would be what, 3-4 days later?
Yes.
Roughly.
Yes.
And you said at whose house again?
Pritam Singh's house.
Okay. And at this occasion, Ms. Lim and Mr. Manap were present.
Yes.
And did you put it in clear terms to them as well that the statement you had made was false?
Yes.
Could they have misunderstood?
No, they could not.
What was their reaction to this?
It was incredible disappointment. There was a lot of anger. But I think there was some compassion there as well. The reaction was that if I were not to be pressed, then the best thing to do would be to retain the narrative that I began in August.
Let me understand the last statement. You said if you were not going to be pressed, and then you retain the narrative that you started in August.
Yes.
It means if you can get away with it, we don't have to clarify the lie, correct?
I think in the simplest terms, yes, you are correct.
And so the Workers' Party leadership who was present there, their initial reaction to being told that there was a lie or falsehood stated in Parliament was to try and duck the issue if possible. And if it doesn't come up, then the truth need not be told eventually, correct?
I have to say, though, that Pritam Singh's initial response was that I should go to the Committee of Privileges. But after discussions and me explaining the circumstances that led me to the information in the first place, that changed.
So the upshot of the meeting a few days after the 7th of August was that the Workers' Party leadership decided that there will be no need to clarify the position. They will keep the lie in place, since if you're not pressed, there's no need to clarify the truth, correct?
Correct.
Was there any exchange of emails or documents or WhatsApp chats which would corroborate this meeting?
No, there would not be.
Did you discuss this with Ms. Loh thereafter?
Yes, I did.
In those discussions, did you give an account of what happened?
Yes, I did.
Would that be by messages?
Yes, that would be by messages.
And that those messages would capture the thrust of what you had discussed with Mr. Singh, Mr. Manap, and Ms. Lim?
Yes.
Yeah, I see you making a note, so could you please get copies of those for us, please?
Yes.
Those messages would have been contemporaneous, meaning they would have been roughly around the same time as when you concluded the meeting with the three of them?
Yes.
Okay. What was Ms. Low's reaction?
I don't remember her reaction by message. But I think when we spoke about it afterwards, there was a sense that the best thing to do would be to tell the truth.
That was Ms. Low's position, to tell the truth.
Thereafter, yes.
Ms. Low told us that she was principally concerned with your well-being
Yes.
and that she felt that in some ways you had come clean and disclosed it to the senior leadership in Workers' Party, and she felt that they would then handle the matter and decide the appropriate course. In a sense, leaving in the hands of the senior members of the party. I mean, in her words, she called Mr. Singh a seasoned politician. Would that also have been your impression?
Yes.
That would have been the reason why you went to them to tell them in the first place and to get counsel and guidance, correct?
Correct.
At this point in time, did you discuss it with anyone else?
Yes, I discussed it with my husband.
Did you also discuss it with Mr. Nathan?
Yes. Yes.
Could you please describe your relationship with Mr. Nathan? What does he do for you? How do you work with him in the context of the Workers' Party's work on the ground? And what else? How else do you interact with Mr. Nathan?
Mr. Nathan is a volunteer with the Workers' Party. He has been, I think, with the party for a while. I met him shortly before I was announced as a candidate. And we've become quite close in that sense.
Is he someone that you would have discussed the speech with, the consequences of the speech, how to handle the clarifications and so on in the weeks ahead?
Yes.
So he would be someone who would have quite intimate knowledge of what you went through, and you would have shared accounts of your discussions with Mr. Singh, Mr. Manap, and Ms. Lim with him contemporaneously?
Yes. Together with Miss Low. So those discussions all happen at the same time.
Okay. Ms. Low has told us that you share a three-way WhatsApp group chat with them. That would be one platform on which you discuss this,
Yes.
I assume, right?
Yes.
Ms. Low also told us that there was at least one occasion when there was a Zoom meeting to discuss what to do and the impact of this. Can you
Yes.
describe that? Can you tell us about it?
So this was after the call that I had with Pritam Singh on the 7th of August. I wanted to also be truthful to them because of the support that they've given me so far, thus far.
Yes.
And I wanted to explain how I got the information and why I included it the way I did.
Okay. This call with Mr. Singh on the 7th of August, can you think carefully, was it initiated by you or by him?
It was initiated by me.
By you. So you called him.
Yes.
In the days that followed the speech made in Parliament, which is on the 4th of August, were there any other discussions with Mr. Singh or with Mr. Manap or Ms. Lim?
The reason that the call was initiated, the reason that I called him was because he was pushing for me to validate the information and verify it. And when I realized that I couldn't, that's when I gave him a call and told him why I couldn't. And subsequently we met in person.
But when you met in person, would that have been the first time you discussed it with him?
Yes.
And did you attempt to conceal the truth from him at that point in time?
No, I did not.
So you told him directly that it was false and you had no way of substantiating it?
Yes.
Now, after this meeting, which took place at Mr. Singh's home a few days after the 7th of August, when I think we sort of reached a conclusion on what happened thereafter, what was your next contact with senior party leadership in relation to this issue?
It was after the 4th of October.
Okay, let me track that timeline because it's about a 6-week window.
Yes.
So you left Mr. Singh's home with the
Yes.
understanding that if it doesn't come up, not pressed, leave it be. So don't clarify, right?
Yes.
And in the ensuing weeks, there was no question, no query about the event. So I guess what you had agreed at Mr. Singh's home was carried out. There was no
I-
need to proactively do anything about it.
I also contracted shingles a week before the September sitting.
Yes.
Therefore, I think that's why it did not come up as well.
Well, I see. You had shingles around September.
Yes, so I did not attend the sitting.
The next time that there was a sitting would it therefore have been October.
Yes.
And at the start of this afternoon session, you told us that on the 3rd of October, you spoke with Mr. Singh. Was that the first occasion after this period shortly after 7th August that you met with him on this issue?
Yes.
Just so that I understand the context and how it works, do you see Mr. Singh regularly?
No, I do not.
So,
Outside of parliamentary work, I do not see him regularly.
right. Is there a group chat that you have with him where he's on it? And are these issues in Parliament discussed in conjunction with other MPs and other activists and volunteers?
We have a group chat with all the MPs. However, this was not discussed.
Okay. So therefore, the next time this came about was on the 3rd of October. On the 3rd of October, can you describe how this meeting was initiated?
It was actually initiated because his wife needed to drop some stuff off at my house for my little daughter, and he came and spoke to me about the upcoming sitting.
So the meeting was at your home
Yes.
on the 3rd of October.
Yes.
Can you tell us the gist of what he had told you?
I think I will be repeating myself, but
Okay.
I
So
shall.
if there's nothing else beyond what you had said earlier, then that's fine.
Yeah.
I asked it. Perhaps I should be clearer. I asked it in the context of. I know what he said, but I'd like to know what triggered it. And
Right.
I'm assuming it's because Parliament sits the next day.
Yes.
And he's expecting that because this is the first occasion you'll be back physically in Parliament, that there's therefore a risk that this will come up. Correct?
I assume that's why he brought it up. Yes.
And therefore, the assumption that you had left off with a few weeks ago, that if not pressed, leave the lie alone, might actually come to be tested on the 4th of October, correct?
Correct.
And so he was discussing with you how then one should respond if this came up, correct?
He was giving advice. Yes.
Yes. And his advice, as you said earlier, was if you retain the narrative, there will be no judgment on you.
Yes.
Okay, and we know what you took away from that.
Yes.
Was there any other discussion with him thereafter, either on the 3rd or on the 4th of October?
On the 4th of October, at the end of or I think shortly after the exchange, there was a short discussion on what we should do, what the next steps are, but there was no concrete decision made.
Okay. On the 4th of October, and if you'd like to refresh yourself as to what the exchange was, I can show it to you or I can give you the transcript. You let me know. There was an exchange between yourself and Minister Shanmugam. There were some very specific questions relating to details, and eventually, if I can summarize your answers, the thrust of your position was because of confidentiality, you were not comfortable going into details. Correct?
Correct.
Was that an approach that you had contemplated or that was discussed or had arisen in the context of your discussions with Mr. Singh the day before?
It was a decision that I made because at that point in time, I was still very afraid of revealing the circumstances of why I received that information in the first place. And also what was going through my mind was that the truth would have a wide impact on survivors out there.
Yes, I understand that part of your statement. My question was whether Mr. Singh was aware of the gist of what you would say if asked.
I'm not sure that he would have been aware.
Because if the purpose of the discussion having been initiated on the 3rd of October was in contemplation or expectation of the 4th of October sitting, and his expectation that the issue might arise, the key question is what would be the response if you are pressed, right? So it would not have been unreasonable or unusual to have expected that he would have wanted to know what you wanted to say if asked. So did that come up?
He actually did not ask me how I would respond. He just made that statement, that brief statement, and that was the end of the discussion.
So retain the narrative, there will be no judgment on you.
Yes.
And so on the 4th of October, when you made that statement, at the time you made the statement in Parliament, at least Mr. Singh, Mr. Manap, and Ms. Lim would have known that the statement in Parliament was false. Correct? And in fact, there were several statements on the 4th of October which were false. Correct?
Correct.
And you mentioned...
which statements are those?
Okay, maybe we should look at the statement so that we are very clear about it, okay? So can I invite you to... Maybe you can assist Ms. Khan. I'd like to look at the 4th October transcript. Yeah, the 4th October Hansard, sorry, the Hansard, which is printed out.
Thank you.
So let me ask you to please just cast your eye over. What is that? What is it? Ms. Han, can I invite you to just cast your eye quickly over the passages? It's been about 2 months, so I'd like you to just refresh yourself. Have a quick look. And let me know when you're done.
Thank you, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Now, if you look at page 2 of the transcript, Minister Shanmugam was talking about this in the context of your anecdote, and in the middle paragraph, he says, she went on to say that the incident happened 3 years ago and she did not wish to re-traumatize the survivor whom she had accompanied. So that's the context in which he put the point. And then asked you for some details. And if you go to page 3, you then said, like I said, it did happen 3 years ago. So this line, that it did happen, is false, right?
It's false that I accompanied this
Yes.
person to the police station, but as I heard the account at a women's support group, I do not believe that portion is false.
Yes. So I'm focusing on the point you made in your speech, which says you were present and you had accompanied her.
I understand.
And this is the part which Minister Shanmugam was asking you for details for. If you had said you had heard it from a support group and from a survivor, there would have been no need for these questions because the key thrust of it was the fact that you had accompanied her. So it is in that context that this statement is false, correct?
Correct.
And it goes on to say, I have not been successful in getting in touch with the person. This is also false because, in fact, you would not have known who this person is. You are not in a position to contact this person, nor have you, I think, tried to do so because it's not a person you accompanied, right?
Correct.
And so the words "I accompanied" is also not correct. Now, you just cast your eye over the next few lines, where you ask for some details. And finally, over the page at page 4, you ask around the middle, can I ask through you, sir, for Ms. Han to confirm in this house that everything she has told us is accurate, that she did accompany such a person and such an incident did happen? And your answer was yes. That's false, right?
Yes.
So, in the context of my earlier questions, these were the false statements that I was referring to.
I understand now.
And
Thank you.
so, my question, to go back to it, was that as you were making these statements in Parliament, Mr. Singh, Mr. Manap, and Ms. Lim would have been aware, as you were making these statements in Parliament, that they were false. Correct?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Now, you mentioned that after these statements were made on the 4th of October, that there was a meeting. I don't know whether it's physically or through messaging. Can you elaborate?
A meeting
With your fellow MPs from the Workers' Party in relation to what had just happened in Parliament on the 4th of October.
It was a meeting in the LO office with Miss Sylvia Lim and Pritam Singh.
So just 3 of you.
Yes.
Can you tell us what happened?
There was a discussion on what the next step should be. And that was it. That was the conclusion of the conversation.
What do you mean by next steps should be? What does that mean? Can you give me a little bit more clarity?
We had a discussion around the possible police investigation, the possibility of me standing or me being heard at the Committee of Privileges. And there was a discussion that, and that was the main gist of the discussion.
Earlier on, I referred you to the quote in the press statement today, where it was suggested that you were ordered to come clean on the 4th of October. So just to be clear, at this meeting on the 4th of October itself, there was never any discussion about why you didn't comply with instructions or orders by Mr. Singh or anyone else in the Workers' Party to clarify the truth, correct?
Correct.
In fact, it was not even clear in the meeting between yourself, Ms. Lim, and Mr. Singh that you would take the position that you eventually did on the 1st of November to admit the truth, which is that the statements were false, correct?
Correct.
So, and I'm reading to you from the Workers' Party press statement from today, and I quote, almost immediately after Parliament adjourned in October, Raeesah agreed with the party leadership that she had to set the record right forthwith. I shared with her that it was the correct thing to do. This didn't happen on the 4th of October, correct?
No, it did not.
In fact, it did not happen until sometime just before the 12th of October, correct?
Correct.
Because you recall it was the 12th when you made a call to Ms. Low.
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
And then that set in motion a chain of events which led to the 1st of November, right? So
Correct.
just to be clear, in the context of this paragraph, it was not almost immediately, and it was certainly not at least for another week or so, correct?
Correct.
Now, you remember that in Parliament, Minister Shanmugam had said that the police would reach out to interview you.
Yes.
And in fact, shortly after this sitting, they did reach out to interview you.
Yes.
There was an email first on the 7th, and then on the 15th of October. And if you like a reference point to that, I can show you the police statement if you can't recall the dates.
Yes. I think there was another one on the 18th as well.
So by the time you had, or rather in the midst of making up your mind, you had a request from the police. 2 requests, at least 3 requests, you said.
Yes.
Did you bring this up to Mr. Singh or anyone else in the Workers' Party?
I did.
did you seek advice and counsel as to how to deal with this?
Yes, I did. But by that time, I think we decided, or I decided as well, that the best thing to do would be to make a statement in Parliament describing my actions and why I made that misjudgment in the first place, hence why I didn't reply the police.
When did you speak to Mr. Singh about the request from the police?
I think on the day that I received it.
Which is the 7th of October.
Yes. Yes.
As of the 7th of October, you would not have had decided that you would come to Parliament to make a statement, correct?
Oh, yes, correct.
Yes. So at that point in time, it was equivocal as to whether you should see the police to clarify, or eventually, as you decided, come to Parliament to clarify. So it was not clear as of the 7th of October, right?
Yes.
So it couldn't have been that you decided that, well, since I'm going to clarify in Parliament anyway, I can ignore the police, correct?
Yes.
So what made you decide, or what made you discuss with Mr. Singh, and how did you all collectively decide not to reply to the police?
I think the decision was because there was no reason for me to have to go to the police station. I think it was a request, and that was what the decision was. That since it was a request, I would not have to go.
But to not even reply to the police? Was that something that Mr. Singh agreed with?
That was a
To ignore the police and to not even reply to the police?
that was the directive. Yes.
Who was that directive from?
Party leadership.
Who would that be?
Sylvia Lim and Pritam Singh.
Not to reply to the police?
Yes.
Did they explain the reasons to you?
No, they did not. Yes, they did, but the reasons were very brief, and that was that they could not compel a member of parliament, or they could not force a member of parliament to visit the police.
Were you not concerned that you were ignoring a legitimate request from the police arising from a statement that you had made in Parliament?
I was concerned, but I was not sure what to do and I asked for advice, and that was the advice that was given to me.
And so you went along with the advice given by Ms. Lim and Mr. Singh,
Yes.
which was to ignore the police and not reply to them on the basis that they cannot compel you.
Yes.
And all of this was even before you had decided that you would clarify the truth with Parliament, correct?
Correct.
So it is not as if in giving that directive, as you put it to you, to ignore the police, that the senior leadership of Workers' Party already knew that you were going to come to Parliament to clarify the truth, correct?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Sure. As of 7th of October, when you received the first email and you said you saw Mr. Singh at that point in time, and you received a directive after discussing with him and with Ms. Lim that you will not reply to the police, you will not accede to the request for an interview. At that juncture, 7th of October, you had not yet decided that you would come to Parliament, come clean, and clarify that the earlier statements were untrue.
Correct.
Right? Correct?
Correct.
Which therefore means that at the time Mr. Singh and Ms. Lim were giving you a directive to ignore the police, there is no reason for them to believe that the truth would come out in some other way, correct?
I don't know what they assumed or why they came to that decision, because I did not ask.
Well, just focus on two things. One, as of 7th October, you told us that you had not yet decided that you would come and clarify the truth with Parliament, right? So that's still an uncertainty at best. There's a request by the police to come and give an interview in relation to the matters you said in Parliament. you're not acceding to it based on the directive from Workers' Party. So I'm saying to you that at least as a result of these two factors, there would have been no basis to assume that the real facts would come out at some stage through some other forum, correct?
Correct.
It is not as if I'm telling you to ignore the police, because I already knew you were going to clarify it in Parliament subsequently. That's not something that Mr. Singh or Ms. Lim could have said on the 7th of October, right?
They did not say it to me, but they might have been thinking it.
They might have thought so, but you had not indicated that you will be making any clarifications in Parliament at that point in time, right?
Yes.
So, if indeed Mr. Singh had, in his words, given you an order to clarify, and he's now saying to the press that he doesn't understand why you didn't comply with that order, had it been an order that you were given to clarify the truth on the 4th of October, and you didn't do that on the 4th of October, one other way of letting the truth come out would be to speak to the police, right?
Yes.
Which he directed you not to do.
Correct.
Now, can I ask you some questions relating to the circumstances that happened immediately after the 1st of November? So going back to that period of time. And I'd like you to just refresh yourself and look at the transcript on the 1st of November. You see it? Could you please assist Ms. Han? I'm looking at Hansard for the 1st of November at around 2 p.m.
Yep.
Okay. So the first couple of paragraphs were your own personal explanation, and I think you'll be familiar with that. And subsequently, leader of the House asked you various questions, and I think if we can just go briefly, you retracted your statement, your anecdote. Ms. Indrani Raja brought you through various parts of the statement which were untrue, and I think it's a matter of record that you have agreed in those respects that it's untrue. Now, up to this point in time, in your mind, the true state of affairs was known to the Workers' Party senior leadership for something close to almost 3 months now, right? By 1st November.
Correct.
And you were told that there will be no judgment on you. And you then made your statement in Parliament on the 1st of November. At any point in time, up to the 1st of November when you made the statement, was there any suggestion that there will be a disciplinary panel set up to look into your conduct?
No, there was not.
Did you have any inkling, any suggestion that you'll be disciplined in this way?
No, I did not.
Now, let me ask you to, if I think it's in the same file, look at the statement of the Workers' Party, in fact, the Secretary General, on the same day, on the 1st of November. Do you have it, Ms. Han?
Yes.
Yes. You probably have seen it previously, but could I ask you to just have a quick read to yourself?
Yes.
Can you give me your reaction to this statement when you first saw it? First, did it come as a surprise to you?
Yes, it did. Actually, this is the first time I'm reading it because I've been on a social media blackout. So
which I can understand. So,
um,
can you tell me which parts surprise you from this statement? Let me.
sorry, I
perhaps
would like to rectify. Actually, it doesn't surprise me at all.
it doesn't surprise you. Okay,
Yeah.
then can you explain why it doesn't surprise you at all?
Because I think this is something a Secretary General would say.
Does it accord with your sense of the discussions that you've been having with Mr. Singh throughout the almost 3 months prior to the statement being released?
I think the gist of it, yes, it does.
And you would also remember that a day later, there was another statement that was issued. I think it's in the same file. I'm not sure you would have seen it, so given your answers earlier, so I'd like you to have a look at it. The announcement of the formation of a disciplinary panel, a DP, you said earlier, surprised you. Can you describe your sense when you first found out about this?
I was shocked. And I think that was my first reaction, that I was just shocked and surprised
Why were you shocked and surprised?
because it had not been discussed with me previously.
Were you surprised that the panel would comprise Mr. Singh, Ms. Lim, and Mr. Manap?
No, because they are the leaders of the Workers' Party.
Did you ask yourself, and I mean, you can share your thoughts with us, what inquiry would take place by these three when these three already were people you confided in much earlier? Did that cross your mind?
Yes, that crossed my mind, but I assumed that they would be doing an in-depth investigation into how the other members of the Workers' Party would feel.
So can you describe the process? And to give you a sense of the time markers, Ms. Loh told us that when she saw this, she was also surprised, or words to that effect. But a few days later, she received an invitation by message to come she's a cadre member, to come and give her views to the DP. And she said she had discussed your attendance as well. She came to your home on Deepavali,
Yes.
which is the 4th of November. And she said that you had been asked to produce some evidence. So this is what we know from Ms. Loh. But I'd like to hear from you, from your perspective.
Yes.
When were you first approached by the DP to attend? What evidence were you asked to produce? And what did you do to go about collecting that evidence?
I was asked by email, and I was asked to produce evidence of me attending the women's support group, and to explain why I made the misjudgment in the first place.
Did you collect the evidence?
Yes, I
and
did.
give it to the Workers' Party DP?
Yes, I did.
You did. And did you provide a written explanation?
Yes, I did.
Was there an oral hearing as well?
Yes, there was.
Can you tell us what happened at this oral hearing? First of all, starting with when it took place and where it took place as well.
It took place at the Workers' Party headquarters. And the meeting was specifically on my performance as a member of parliament. I think there was not much that they needed to ask about my misjudgment and what happened in parliament because they knew in the first place. So the meeting was centered around my performance, basically.
Your performance generally, or your performance in conjunction with or in relation to the 3rd of August speech?
My performance generally, and then a little bit about what happened in Parliament as well.
Prior to this, had there been any hint that your performance as a Member of Parliament generally would be under scrutiny?
No, there was not.
There was not until this occasion.
Yes.
But the purpose of this disciplinary panel was very focused. It was looking only at the admissions that you had made in Parliament, that what you said on the 3rd of August was untrue. So why was there an inquiry generally into your performance?
I cannot assume, and I did not ask this question.
But from, I mean, you were, if I may say, at the center of this inquiry.
Yes.
You would have been entitled to ask,
Yes.
what has this got to do with my performance generally? But you
I
not.
did ask a question to that effect, and the answer was that everything is under review.
So this occasion, do you remember the rough date of this meeting?
I can give you the exact details because it's in my emails.
Okay, I'll be grateful if you could please go back and look at it and produce all the emails which are relevant to this or arising from this DP, and any of the evidence that you've collected as well in relation to the request that was made in which you attended to the DP. Ms. Han, I understand from Ms. Low that there were 2 meetings at least that you had with the DP. The
Yes.
second of which was on the 29th of November. Is that correct?
Correct.
So that would have been earlier this week on Monday.
Yes.
Can you tell us about it? First of all, how were you notified to attend on the 29th? At what time? Where?
I requested for the meeting myself by email, and I was notified by email as well. It was held at the Workers' Party HQ.
What time was it?
10:30 in the morning.
And who was present at this meeting?
The disciplinary committee, Pritam Singh, Sylvia Lim, and Faisal Manap.
Okay. And what was the purposes for which you had requested for this meeting?
I requested for the meeting because I wanted to explain or at least reply to the remarks made in the first meeting on my performance as a Member of Parliament.
Okay. And did you prepare anything in writing to substantiate your position?
Yes, I did.
You did. And can you give us a gist of what was discussed at the meeting and how that concluded?
I outlined my successes and even my challenges as a Member of Parliament, including my work on the ground and in Parliament.
Was there any discussion on what I would have thought would have been the principal concern of the DP, which is in relation to the 3rd of August speech?
There was, but the discussion was that I had made a mistake and it had cost the party deeply.
And what was your response to that?
I agree.
And how was that resolved? Was there a conclusion to this? How was it left off?
There was no conclusion. That was towards the end of the meeting.
At the time you left the meeting, what did you understand was the state of play concerning the progress of the DP? I mean, whether it had come to an end, had it made a finding, had it drawn to a close, had it met all the witnesses it wanted to, and so on? What was your sense of that occasion?
I sensed that a decision had not been made yet, but after I left that meeting, my personal decision was that I should resign.
Ms. Low told us that one or more of the senior members of the Workers' Party leadership suggested to you to consider resigning from the party. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
The statement that was released by the Workers' Party today said that you were given an option of either resigning or you'll be expelled from the party. Was that put to you?
that was not put to me.
So, at what occasion was the suggestion for you to resign put to you?
At this meeting
On the 29th.
on the 29th.
Did this play a big part in your decision ultimately?
Ultimately, the decision I made was because I felt that it was the best thing for the party and to retain the integrity of what it means to be a member of parliament.
Did you feel that you had been let down by the party? And I'll explain why I asked this to give you a fuller picture, okay? We heard from Ms. Loh. She was obviously aware that you had met with the party once. She told us that she and Mr. Nathan asked to meet with the party DP on the 25th of November. And in the meeting, she came prepared with a list of reasons why it would be wrong for you to resign or to be expelled. She said that she stood up for you on a number of occasions on what you've done, and finally also made the point, I'll just check my notes. Also made the point to the DP that they themselves should also come clean and disclose that they had been aware of what you told them since August, since about 3 months ago. And she then told us that ultimately when you were told by the Workers' Party senior leadership to consider resigning from the party, she felt very betrayed, and those are her words. So that's from her perspective. And now asking you the same series of questions from your perspective. You have gone through this, made a speech, admitted that it was false, it's a mistake, but a few days after that you had approached the senior leadership and disclosed it to them, in your words, for the purposes of seeking counsel and advice. And also, I think you shared the same approach with Ms. Loh in that you told the senior leadership you leave it to them as to what guidance they would give. You went through the process. You didn't expect there to be a DP, but there was. You went through that process too. And at the end of that, on the 29th of November, in your words, you didn't think that he had reached a decision yet. But yet at the same time, on that same occasion, they raised the prospect of you considering resignation from the party. So in that context, my question is, did you feel let down? Were you taken aback?
My thought process after the meeting was that I had made this terrible mistake and that only I can account for it. So at that point in time, I was not thinking about whether I had been betrayed or whether I was not being supported by the party. My main concern was that I had affected the integrity of what it means to be a member of the Workers' Party and also a member of Parliament.
Right, I understand. Thank you. Would it be fair to say, Ms. Han, that you place some stock in the guidance that senior members of the party would give you, Mr. Singh, Ms. Lim, Mr. Manap, correct?
Correct.
And I think that's the reason why you went to them in the first place, correct?
Correct.
Can I ask you to consider this and tell me if you can answer? If they had told you on the 4th of October that you should come clean and clarify, would you have done so?
I would have done so, yes.
If they had told you that you should take up the interview with the police and explain the position and come clean, would you have done so?
I would have done so, yes.
So you did neither because they had told you that there will be no judgment in the case of the first instance and that you're under no compulsion in the case of the second instance, correct?
Correct.
Now, Ms. Han, just moving on to a slightly different angle now. Mr. Daniel Goh had put up a post in the aftermath of what happened, and he said that speeches between Workers' Party MPs were generally reviewed by each other before they were delivered, and he used the words collective consensus on these speeches. Is that something that you are familiar with? Was it practiced? And in particular, was it practiced in connection with what was delivered by you on the 3rd of August?
Yes.
So the speeches were reviewed prior to it being delivered on the 4th of August?
Yes, but I made some mistakes in that regard as well. I submitted the speeches late,
What do you mean by late? At what juncture?
2 days before the sitting in August.
What kind of time frame are you supposed to comply with?
I think it is a week.
So the rule is that you must submit your speeches a week before the sitting, and this will be submitted to who?
We submit it through a portal.
I'm sorry?
We submit it through a portal
Through a
that
portal.
everyone has access to.
So who are the people who have access to this portal?
All the sitting MPs.
And generally, I'm not talking about the 3rd of August in particular, generally, what's the process? What's the procedure? How do you vet? How do you give comments? How do you give suggestions? What happens?
Basically, you can read any speech that's on the portal and you can give comments,
And do
it's
members regularly do?
yes.
Quite actively?
I wouldn't say actively because I know many MPs are busy.
But that's the purposes for which you set up a portal, and the rule is 7 days before, and you cross-review each other's speeches.
Yes.
In this case, the 3rd of August speech was filed to support a motion moved jointly by Ms. Herting Roo, and Mr. Leon Pereira. Did you discuss it with them beforehand, given that it is their motion?
All of us discussed the topics that we would be speaking about, and we were in agreement with the topics we would
For
bring
the
up.
broad topics.
Yes.
Did you discuss with them your specific anecdote?
No, I did not.
By the time you submitted the speech in draft, albeit late, it was still 2 days before, which actually in many cases is not late. Did the paragraph on the anecdote already appear in the speech?
It was inserted, I think, a day before.
A day before it was put into the portal.
Yes.
So by the time
No,
it was put
sorry, no. I mean, I uploaded the speech and then I added the anecdote a day before.
I see. So it would have been available on the portal at least a day before it was delivered.
Yes.
Were there any comments or reviews to your speech?
Yes,
far
there
as you
was
can
one
recall.
comment from Pritam Singh, and he circled the anecdote, and he put substantiate ?
And what was your answer to that?
At that point in time, I did not understand what that meant, but upon reflection, I understand now why he circled it and why he said what he said.
So did you reply to that comment?
No, I did not.
You didn't. Did Mr. Singh raise this as an issue after the speech was delivered on the 3rd of August?
Yes, he did.
And what did he say?
His comment was that he expressed disappointment in the fact that I did not understand or I did not place importance in why he included the comment that he made.
In the same speech, you also you also took a position in relation to female genitalia mutilation and also Muslim marriages. You recall?
Yes, I recall.
Were you given guidance on these topics, or did you discuss them with any other member of the Workers' Party?
We all discussed it. We all discussed our various topics with each other at a meeting at some point, yes.
So prior to you drafting it and uploading it onto the portal, there would have been some sense of clarity between the members as to what topics each one was raising.
Yes.
Did you seek any specific advice or guidance on these topics, given that they are fairly discrete and somewhat esoteric areas?
Yes, I did.
Who did you discuss that with?
I discussed it with Faisal Mana.
Anyone else?
And Pritam Singh as well.
on these topics?
Yes.
All right. Do you involve your legislative assistant, Mr. Lim,
Mike Lim.
Lim Hang? Yeah, I was
Oh,
told he doesn't
sorry.
like his Chinese name so much, so he prefers Mike. So let's call him Mike. So did you discuss this with Mike?
No, so I think we function a little differently. Our legislative assistants work primarily on the ground. He has no involvement at all in any of my parliamentary work.
What about Ms. Loh?
At this point in time, I did not discuss it with Ms. Loh.
So the speech was uploaded to the portal without Ms. Loh's input.
Yes.
Okay. On the 3rd of August, after the speech was delivered, can you tell me if Mr. Singh approached you to ask you, I mean, given the context again that there was a speech, he had given you a comment to substantiate the very paragraph in question which MOS Desmond Tan and subsequently Minister Indrani spoke about. Did he pick up the point from you with you thereafter?
Yes, he did, and I think I mentioned this earlier. This was why I made that phone call with him on the 7th of August, because he was pressing me to verify the information.
Did he speak to you on the 3rd of August itself?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And you have the transcript with you, if you'd like to refer to it, when Minister Indrani took you through some questions on the 1st of November, perhaps I'll refer you to the transcript itself, just so that we're all on the same page. If you look at the 1st of November transcript, there were a series of questions that were raised by Ms. Indrani Raja. I think I went through it with you a bit earlier, but there are 2 points which I'd like to bring to your attention. The first relates to a suggestion by Ms. Raja, to which you agreed that the same points that you wanted to make in relation to the trauma that a survivor might face and the sensitivity that a police officer ought to have could be made without any reference to the support group, and you agreed with that. Do you remember?
Yes, I remember.
So there was a way of conveying the point without having to bring in your personal experience, which turned out to be untrue, correct?
Correct.
But you did so because you wanted to lend credibility to the story. Would that be fair?
Correct.
You didn't want someone to come and say it's not believable or untrue if it is hearsay, so you made up the point that you were there.
Correct.
Can I also ask you to look at the discussion you had with Ms. Raja in relation to the question of confidentiality? And if you like to look at the transcript, it's on page 5. You had said one of the principles of being in a women's support group is that the details should remain confidential. And Ms. Raja then goes on to say, so because when the member was asked for details in Parliament, she said that she did not want to disclose because of confidentiality. But based on what the member has just said, actually, by that time, because the story had already been recounted, it means the member had already breached the confidentiality to the survivor. Is that not correct? And your answer is, that is correct, yes.
Yes.
So, would it be fair to say that confidentiality was actually not a reason behind why you needed to have made up that story in the first place?
No, it was not, but I think it was my own fear of exposing myself as a survivor and being a part of a women's support group.
Yes, and on that latter point, I think we had agreed that you could have made the similar point in Parliament without any reference to whatsoever to yourself as a survivor or in fact even being in a support group, correct?
Correct.
And if it was not a reason that held up, as in confidentiality was not a reason which held up on the 1st of November, it would also not have held up on the 4th of October when Minister Shanmugam asked you those questions, right?
Correct.
It was no basis to say confidentiality when all that was sought was some details about the location, where, what date, and so on, if the occasion actually happened, correct?
I think when I mean confidentiality, it's not only about not revealing the identity of the survivor, but it is also ensuring that the survivor is not re-traumatized.
Yes. And I think earlier you agreed with me that when Min Indrani asked you about this on the 1st of November, the point is that actually for these things, the convention is that once you mention it, even if there can't be an attribution to a specific individual, that's a breach of confidentiality, right?
Correct.
So my point is that if that's the case on the 1st of November, all the more so on the 4th of October, when details were just being sought on, from the police station side, details of the occasion, all the less would there be confidentiality breaches, correct?
I don't agree because I'm not sure that there would be no investigation if details of the police station and the police officers were given.
But you will remember that Minister Shanmugam was very careful to say that the identity would be protected. He accepted your point that confidentiality was important. He accepted your point that re-traumatizing the victim was something that we have to be very careful about, and that the police was very mindful and sensitive to, right?
I think regardless if the police is sensitive or not, or the investigative or how sensitive the investigation is, the survivor would have been re-traumatized anyways.
But
just going through a process of being investigated brings up trauma that I don't think anyone understands.
all right. But all that is predicated on there being actually an identifiable victim that you know had attended with you to the police station. But in this case, there wasn't any, correct?
Yes, but I understand that you're asking a hypothetical question.
Yes, I wanted to understand the lay of the land, but now applying it to these facts here, there was in fact actually no such victim with whom you had gone to the police station.
Correct.
Right, on these facts, yes. I ask this because, Ms. Han, one of our task is to assess the degree of culpability and make an assessment. And I hope you understand where I'm coming from, which is why I'm going into this detail. And so, to be very upfront with you, I'll tell you where I'm coming from. As of 4th of October, it would have been 8 weeks since the first statement was made. And one of the issues that we have to consider is the extent to which you made a deliberate, calculated decision to continue with the falsehood on the 4th of October. And along the way, the reasons that you proffered would be relevant in assessing that. Or was this something that you did after seeking guidance from senior leaders? Whether that excuses your conduct is something else, but it goes to the degree of culpability. Do you understand what I mean?
I understand.
And I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to get the facts around it to understand that carefully from you. So, because it strikes me that if you are on your own, determined to perpetrate the falsehood, 8 weeks from the first one, and there was no guidance that you were given, no advice that you were given by this, in this intervening period, I think that speaks to one state of mind. But if there is a motivation and you understood something and you felt that this was guidance from someone who should know what they're telling you, that also speaks to a different occasion. So in that context, these are my questions. Did you consult with anyone in coming up with what you said on the 4th of October?
I did not, and I will not absolve myself of the responsibility and I will not remove myself from being from facing the consequences for that.
I understand. Thank you for your candor in that. Secondly, did you, at that point in time, whether rightly or wrongly, did you feel that you had the support of your senior party leaders in what you were doing?
At that point in time, yes.
And I think we covered this ground earlier. You had left the meeting on the 3rd of October. I think we don't need to traverse that old ground, but that was your frame of mind, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Did anyone, I want to be very clear because of the statements made by the Workers' Party today, did anyone at any point in time prior to the 4th of October tell you that you should clarify the truth on the 4th of October?
No,
Are you very sure?
I am very sure.
No senior leader, no activists, no one?
No.
All right. I said this because there are some very strong statements made in the press release today and in the press interview. And I wanted to be fair to you, to be putting it to you and making sure that that's the case. Okay? Just so I get this correct, can you remember how it was suggested to you that you should consider resigning from the party? Who said this to you, and what was the form of language that was used, if you can remember?
It was suggested to me by Pritam and Sylvia, and the language was that I did not have the support of my teammates, and that it was for my own well-being that I should do so.
Did not have the support of your teammates, meaning your Sengkang GRC teammates?
Yes,
Is that something that you accept?
that is something I accept.
Was that lack of support something that was evident to you?
It was made evident to me at the meeting.
Through the three individuals, but not through your teammates directly?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that you discussed this with your family. I don't want to breach any confidentiality, and I don't want to go into anything that's personal, but I do need to know what was discussed with your family in relation to the statements that were made and the decision that you took. And again, to give you the context, to be fair, what we heard from Ms. Loh was that your family came to hear of this around the middle of October. She wasn't very precise on the dates. And your family was very concerned with the way in which the statement was worded and had given suggestions. So that's the frame of mind that I have. And I'd like to now ask you for your perspective. Can you please set out for us when your family first knew, what was discussed with them, what were their views on the statement, and were there parts of the statement that they were unhappy with, or that they added in, or that they disagreed with? Can you share that with us?
They were made aware towards the end of October, from middle to the end of October.
End of October.
I'm not quite sure about the date.
Mm-hmm.
And they were concerned that I would be sharing a very personal story in a very public arena.
What aspect were they concerned about?
They were concerned that I would be sharing that I myself am a survivor.
Were they concerned that you should come clean and tell the truth?
Yes.
Was that their advice to you?
Yes.
Did they give any input to the statement, the way in which it was drafted, the points that it contained?
They did give some input, yes.
And was that taken on board?
Yes, I took some of them on board.
Apart from your family and the various individuals from Workers' Party that you mentioned, and of course, Mr. Nathan and Ms. Low, did you get advice from anyone else, either directly or indirectly,
I
about
got
what to do, about how to approach the police, about what to do with clarifying the truth in Parliament, and so on?
I got advice from a lawyer as well.
Besides the lawyer,
No one else.
no one else. Did anyone else tell you that they have received advice and was conveying any advice to you? Anyone trying to help you in any way?
No.
No. I'm going to put a series of propositions to you in relation to what happened with the police, and you can tell me what your sense is. I will suggest to you that the reason you were advised not to respond to the police on the 7th of October and thereafter on the various two other occasions was because there was a concern by Workers' Party that the truth would come out through those police interviews. Would you agree or disagree?
I'm really not sure.
And the concern is that if you went to the police, you would be there giving a statement without any privileges, as opposed to making a clarification in Parliament where you would have privileges. Would that be a fair sense as to what was operative behind the decision?
That was my concern, actually.
And so that was one factor behind why you chose to ignore the police and decide to speak in Parliament instead.
Yes.
All right. Okay, thank you, Ms. Han. I've got no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Graceful.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khan. Just like to clarify one point that you have made earlier on. If I understand you correctly, basically there was a change of your position between 7th October and 12th October. Am I right to perhaps infer from what you said that it was the police email that has made you change your mind about making that statement that you made on the 1st November, eventually about correcting the narrative in Parliament?
It was not only that, but it was also after the 4th of October sitting where I was questioned by Minister Shanmugam.
But you continued, while you were being questioned by Minister
Yes.
Shan, you continued to, take that position?
Yes. So after that sitting, upon reflection, I realized that this was something that I really needed to rectify.
I see. Was that something that you discussed with your party leadership immediately after your the sitting? You have told us that you have a meeting with Ms. Sylvia Lim, Ms. Pritam Singh at LO's office on the 4th. You didn't give me the impression earlier that you have decided to make a statement that you made on 1st November.
Yes, I had not decided by then yet.
Okay. So somewhere between that and 12, you made the decision on the 12th, right?
Yes.
So when did you actually make that decision?
On
Was
the
there a
12th.
date?
On the 12th
On
itself.
the 12th itself.
Yeah.
And this was on your own volition that you contacted Ms. Low that you will make this statement, and that started the whole series of events thereafter?
It was also during a meeting with Sylvia Lim and Pritam Singh.
Did you decide at the meeting, after the meeting, before the
We
meeting?
decided at the meeting.
The meeting was called by you, was called by Ms. Low asking for a meeting with Mr. Pritam Singh?
It was called by Mr. Pritam Singh.
What time was that meeting?
It was in the morning.
So you had the meeting with Mr. Pritam Singh and Ms. Sylvia Lim,
Yes.
and that's when you decided and make that decision known to them?
Yes, that's when we discussed what that would be the decision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may just add on to what Minister Grace asked. So at that meeting on the 12th, where you said I guess that's when you pretty much decided that you should come clean and account for it. Can you just share again how that transpired? Was it very much initiated by you, or was it initiated by any of the others? How that evolved during that course of that 12th meeting?
It was a discussion that we had together, and we came to the conclusion together.
You can amplify a little. What were the considerations given as to why? Because clearly before 12, the position as advised to you was that you could carry on with the present narrative. No judgment will be made to you. Therefore, you didn't feel a need to do that. So what transpired and what were the considerations that you discussed on the 12th that led to this decision that maybe we should admit and figure out how then to account for what happened?
From me personally, the consideration was that this was something that would weigh on me for the rest of my life. And because of that, it was something that I needed to clarify. I don't think I could have lived with myself.
For the party leadership, principally for Mr. Pritam Singh and Ms. Sylvia Lim, what were their thinking and considerations in the discussion with you on this matter?
I think their consideration was that the matter would not be dropped.
You could amplify further. What else was discussed as to the thinking behind? So the fact was that the matter would not be dropped, and so therefore, and what were the other worries and concerns they had, and therefore the need to therefore come and account for it?
The other concern was, like I mentioned as well, my mental health, because I think it was obvious that this was really affecting me and that I needed to clarify it for my own conscience.
Were there any other considerations discussed as to?
No, there were not.
So was that a conclusion reached collectively, and that yourself with the two other senior party members, that this is the course of action that you all would embark on thereafter?
Yes.
And in that meeting, was there any mention about...
Your mic.
Oh, sorry. At that meeting, was there any mention about disciplinary consequences within the party?
I asked, and the answer was no.
Zaki, any questions?
Yes. So why do you think that they wouldn't go straight for disciplinary committee, or DP, before or on that 12th October date?
I don't know.
Don't speculate, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
What if after your statement, SecGen comes and say, you could have gone the other way because you misjudged his statement of, we won't judge you. What would you say to that?
I would say that that's accurate as well,
Why so?
because I guess it could be inferred as a vague judgment, a vague statement to make.
You don't think it's a get-out clause or meant for you to go either way or being non-committal?
I don't know. I don't want to assume.
Okay. After August the 3rd, you mentioned that you came clean to Member Pritam Singh, Member Sylvia Lim and Faisal Manap. Between then and the time that you came clean, 1st November, who else knew? Who else do you think knew?
My secretarial assistant, Peng Lo, and also the WP volunteer, Mr. Nathan.
You don't think any other MP members or even your Sengkang GRC teammates knew?
No,
So never discussed, never taken up to CEC?
no.
Okay. When nothing moved, did you ever consider going up to CEC for consideration?
No, I did not consider that.
Given that the three of them were the only ones who knew, do you find it a conflict that the same three sat on the discipline panel without anyone outside the circle sitting on it?
I'm sorry, I don't have enough experience in how disciplinary panels are formed, so I couldn't make any assumptions in that regard.
Okay. Thanks, Chairman.
Dennis, questions?
Hi, Ms. Sun. Just one question for you. After the material speech in question in August, did you when did you first consider bring up this matter to your family?
I brought it up to my husband, and he was the first person to know.
Yes, you did mention that. What about your parents and the rest of your family?
I did not want to put them through the emotional turmoil that it would bring.
Was this in itself a reason for not making the decision not to bring up in Parliament before November?
It was definitely one of my considerations, yes.
Just now you also mentioned that the when you were submitting the speech on the portal, yeah, do you remember that? Okay, can I just ask? Do you remember that do you usually submit your speech early?
I usually do not.
So in this, for the speech in August, do you remember that how late were you in your submission?
Yes, I was 2 days. I submitted the speech 2 days before.
Did you make any amendment after your submission of the speech?
Yes, like I mentioned, I added the anecdote on the day before the sitting.
So after the, you mentioned that Mr. Pritam Singh had made a comment. Did you remember why you did not respond to him?
At that point in time, I did not take it. Upon reflection, I know that I should have understood what he meant, but at that point in time, I did not understand the gravity of what substantiate meant.
Can you remember how late it was the day before that you submit this, that you made this amendment on the portal?
I don't remember.
No more questions, Mr. Speaker.
Afternoon, Ms. Khan. Just want to seek some clarification from you, if I may. If you recall, on the 2nd of November, the 1st of November, when you made your clarification in Parliament, Leader of the House, Ms. Indrani Rajah, had asked you some questions to clarify your statement. And she said, she asked you whether you could have made your case, your sense that the police should treat survivors of sexual assault better, that you could have made that case or made that argument in August without mentioning the falsehoods that you were there with her at the police station, and you said yes.
Correct.
And that in clarifying on the 1st of November that you had not been physically there could also have been made without necessarily strictly speaking, disclosing that you were a member of a survivor support group as well, or that you had personally suffered the horrific act of sexual assault yourself. That factually you could have clarified without explaining what had happened to you personally as well.
I did think about that, but I think I owed it to survivors and as well to the public a full explanation on why I made the misjudgment that I did, and a full explanation on how I got the information in the first place. So I wanted to be completely truthful at that point in time.
So that was more the context rather than the facts that related to that falsehood.
Correct.
So would it be right that on the 4th of October, when the Minister of Home Affairs asked you repeatedly about what you said on the 3rd of August, that you could have clarified without necessarily disclosing that you were yourself a survivor, or that you had heard it from a survivor support group, and that you actually heard it from an individual, but you were not physically at the police station?
Yes, I could have, but again, that would mean that I would not be telling the whole truth. And I wanted to make sure that when I did make this clarification on the 1st of November, that was the entire truth and that was truthful to the public and to Parliament.
Thank you. On the 12th of October, when you resolved, together with the party leadership, that you would make a statement in Parliament to clarify what had actually happened, that you then immediately broke the news to your parents about your own traumatic experience?
It was not immediate. It was a few weeks after that.
After 12th October?
Yes.
Okay. You know, in October, there was a 2-day sitting, if I recall, 4th and 5th October, and that the clarification sought by the Home Affairs Minister was, if I recall right, at the start of the sitting, at around shortly after 12:30 p.m., and the sitting ended late in the evening. Just to confirm that neither on the 4th nor the 5th did you resolve, or were you directed to speak up and ask to make a clarification there and then?
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you. No further questions.
If you may allow me to ask a question about your intention of making the first statement, the very statement that's in question now about police treatment of survivors. When you make those words, surely your intention was for the police to improve treatment of survivors. I mean, you went on to explain that, there's been training rolled out for judges and so on. Therefore, you call on MHA to provide more officers with training. So, would you not thought about, really follow-up question about your accusation that we would want details about the police officers in question? Wasn't that a sort of a natural conclusion that we would have when we bring up matters in the Parliament?
I understand your concern. Firstly, I would like to say thank you for using the word survivor. I think that's it's for me. I think it's an incredible first step. I did not use the anecdote to make any accusations against the police. I used the anecdote to share that this happens, and that we should take it seriously. And if we want more survivors to come forth and make reports, then there needs to be institutional changes. I don't personally think the solution is punishment. I think it's training, and that's why I felt from the beginning that it's never been an accusation.
Yes, but for any MP to bring it up, and for any MP who wants their speeches in Parliament to be taken seriously by the ministry, wouldn't you expect the ministry to actually rectify what's going wrong? I mean, if indeed, as what you have claimed, that a police officer is making very uncalled for remarks in the investigation, wouldn't you, as the MP who is very passionate about this topic, expect the minister to follow up and to correct what's wrong?
That was my misjudgment. I did not realize that it would be taken as an accusation. I thought that it would be taken as an example that we could improve upon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raeesah, for your answers. I know this can be easy for you, rehashing this over and over again, but there are some questions I'd like to get some answers to fully appreciate the motivations. So again, going back to the statement you made, because you said, in my line of work, I've accompanied people to the police stations. I just want to understand, this is true? You have been doing volunteer work or formal work on this? When you talk about line of work, is that something that you have been doing?
Yes, it is something that I have been doing, but I have not ever accompanied someone inside the police station. I've provided support after, and even in my line of work in different countries, I have accompanied them into the police station before.
Sorry, so you have accompanied people in police stations elsewhere?
Yes.
Not in Singapore?
Yes.
Okay. But this anecdote that you shared, is it something you heard from attending an actual survivor group meeting?
It's an anecdote that I heard from a woman's support group.
So you actually heard it from the person who experienced it herself?
Yes, the person who went to make a report.
So what is not true is the fact that you did not accompany her, and you did not go to the police station with her?
Correct.
Okay. I wanted to also just appreciate your thinking when you realized what happened on the 3rd of August. You explained that leader of the House subsequently, nudged you further to provide the details and all that. And pursuant to that, you reached out to him and spoke to him. So on the 7th of August, you met him.
No, sorry.
Leader of the opposition.
Sorry, on the 7th of August, we had a phone call.
Phone call, okay.
Yes.
And at that phone call, you had told him that what you had told about the statement that you've made about accompanying someone to the police station was not true.
Yes, I said that it was not true.
At that juncture, when you were saying it, did you in your mind contemplate that you would then have to actually tell the truth? Is that something that you were contemplating, to actually figure out whether you should then now come clean and actually tell the truth?
Yes, it was. It did go through my mind.
So you were, at that stage and throughout this whole process, you were seeking out for guidance as to what decision to make?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Khan, I have a few questions. As you know, we are here to ascertain the facts behind, I guess, and the evolution of your thoughts, why you did what you did. Clearly, as you have mentioned a few times, you do not want to absolve your own personal responsibility, and we respect that. But as we have discussed, you were also seeking guidance from the leadership, from those more experienced than you, as to what would be the right thing to do. It would appear, from what you have shared, that if you had been guided, which eventually you did, which is to come clean and to admit, if you had been guided earlier, that would be the approach to take. You would have been prepared to have taken that approach much earlier. Would that be correct?
Yes.
And you did reach out for guidance, but you were not provided that specific guidance until, as you mentioned, on 12 October, then the decision was taken to take this final approach.
Yes.
And just to make clear that the approach until that stage was that if you could keep on to the narrative, that would be something permissible. You will not be judged on that. And I guess as of 12th October, the sense was that it was no longer viable to maintain that narrative. Would that be correct?
I think the exact words were there would be no judgment.
There'd be no judgment, meaning that if you had chosen to continue maintaining that narrative, they would not judge you.
Correct.
And they would respect your decision to go that path.
Correct.
But at no time there was an encouragement for you to clarify and to say that let's take this approach to tell the truth and so on. Until
No.
12th October when there was a collective decision.
No conclusion to that regard had been reached until the 12th of October.
Okay. I think it's important for us to understand that because clearly guidance was sought. As a new member of parliament, you're seeking advice from your seniors as to how best to approach it. And I guess understanding that backdrop was important for us. And I think we appreciate your sharing of that. Any other questions from other members? We would require, we have mentioned a number of different personalities. Any other persons you feel that it would be useful to come before the Committee of Privilege for us to speak to have a better understanding of what transpired?
Not that I can think of.
So presently, I guess Mr. Nathan would be useful. He did a journey review in a sense, in terms of how the issues evolved. Beyond that, I guess the other parties directly involved would be Mr. Pritam Singh, Ms. Sylvia Lim, Mr. Faisal Manap, and beyond that would be your family members that you shared issues with.
Yes.
So what we would require from you would be documents based on what has been shared today, whether on WhatsApp, email, or whatever form, Telegram, etc., printed documents or otherwise, or even hard copy documents. And if you can compile them. And even on issues that were not necessarily discussed today, but are relevant to the issues at hand. That would help us in the committee to have a better and fuller understanding of the circumstances. I think that would be needed from you. And if you could, I guess, expeditiously work on them, and our staff from Parliament will guide you on that to compile the documents to present it to us so that we can verify and, I think, cross-reference based on what is said. Beyond that, anything else we need to highlight at this point? Okay, so if there are no further questions for now, again, we'd like to thank you for coming before the committee. A transcript of the proceedings will be shared with you for verification, so please go through it. And if you have any minor amendments, etc., do make the changes and send the transcripts back to us. Again, our Parliament staff will guide you on that. Do note that the transcripts and any evidence given to the committee are not to be disclosed to anyone, not to be published, kept strictly confidential until the committee has presented its report to Parliament, which means that not to discuss this with anyone else, and I would suggest including your family as well. So you may withdraw for now, but do. We won't be calling you. You don't need to remain in Parliament for now, except to, I think, settle some of the administrative stuff with the Parliament staff. If there's a need to call you back on a later date, we would do so, and we'll let you know. Otherwise, I think our staff will accompany you to the waiting room. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sergeant at Arms, please accompany the witness out. Thank you.